Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and today we're looking at Brimaz, Blight of Oreskos. This is a Phyrexian Kindred deck, and one of our donation decks of the week that comes to us from Neth. Neth says, I bought a new deck, Brimaz, Blight of Oreskos. I love the look of Phyrexian cards and wanted to make a Kindred deck around them. I've upgraded it quite a bit already and went into Poison, Proliferate, Incubate. The biggest issue is I don't really like the Incubate side of it. I find it clunky and slow overall. I'm wanting to move away from Incubate altogether if it's possible. I don't mind changing commander or even adding another color to do this. Thank you for all your help. Thank you so much, Neth, for supporting the channel. And I'm going to actually come to the defense of Incubate a little bit. I think sometimes there are certain mechanics that we look from the wrong angles. And Incubate, I think very much so, is one of those abilities. Incubate is something that we look at as making slow tokens and bodies, when really, this is a free trigger that creates an artifact token with +1/+1 counters. And if you thought of yourself as having a commander that creates artifacts every time you cast an artifact creature or a Phyrexian, then it starts getting a little better. In fact, I would say you almost never need to transform them to get the full use out of them. That being said, what I will do is, if you would like an alternative Phyrexian and Proliferate and that kind of counter idea, I will link my Vishgraz Abzan, what I'm calling Proliferate deck. This is my deck. I've played it on MTG Mudsta, I think at least once or twice. It used to be a different deck, so if you go too far back, it won't be the same one. But the current build is a very much so Proliferate-oriented build with +1/+1 counters. Definitely some Infect and or some, what do we call it, Toxic? I just call it all Infect. Very, very strong deck. I'm very, very happy with it. I would put this here that if you want to look in a different direction and you want some inspiration, especially in different colors, you're going to find some good stuff here. But in the meantime, we're going to keep looking at Brimaz, and we're going to see what we can do with all of these counters, all of these tokens that can make the deck a little more fun and a little more functional. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Brimaz, and what do they do for our Phyrexian Kindred deck? Brimaz Blight of Oreskos is a 4-mana 3/4 Phyrexian cat in white and black, and they have two abilities. The first one says whenever you cast a Phyrexian creature or an artifact creature spell, incubate X, where X is that spell's mana value. As a reminder, an incubator token is a double-sided token that is just an artifact on one side and a 0/0 Phyrexian artifact creature on the other. The idea is they're like eggs, and later you hatch them to create an army. I vastly prefer this to the amass a mechanic. Last time we had the big bad making tokens of what they do. I prefer the incubation whole thing is a lot cooler, a lot more interesting, even though they're both pretty similar, but the only difference is one goes wide and one goes tall, one requires more setup and the other one is kind of all in. So it's better than you think it is. I guarantee that. Then Brimaz has a second ability that says at the beginning of each end step, if a Phyrexian died under your control this turn, proliferate. Importantly, once again, is this backside of incubation tokens are Phyrexians, so you can use that to proliferate across the board. Now, what's interesting in a deck like this, before we go any further, is that Brimaz is not necessarily a toxic commander and should not necessarily be built as much. We definitely have room for some toxic enabling, but we shouldn't just assume that's the right way to do this. This is probably going to build much more into a Kindred deck with a lot of artifact sacrifice and artifact token synergies, let's say. That being said, I will try to take out some of the incubators and some of the weaker parts of it to give us room for some stronger stuff. Looking at our lands, 37, and our curve, I'd say it's pretty nice. I could see this 3 mana seems very, very high, but generally we have a lot of really good 3-drops, and we'll look through them quickly, but generally I'm happy with the deck. Just a few things to cut and snip here. Starting with Progenitor Exarch. Progenitor Exarch, despite being a 1/2 for 1, which I would say is the correct way to generally play them, and the ability to flip your incubation tokens for free. I think this is definitely too far in on the all-in incubation strategy. And if you're already not liking them, and I get that, they're just kind of like a value piece or an engine piece in a deck that doesn't necessarily want to be an engine and can be an easy cut there. After that, we've got a few others. Attentive Skywarden, likewise, is definitely just a little clunky for what we're doing. It's a little too all-in on the Incubate. And basically everything I just said, just say it again, except for the nice benefit is this is a creature with, evasion, but costs 3 times as much generally as the other creature. Both times, we're just going to run them out. Norn's Inquisitor is a close one. I would say this as a creature coming in and generating that first incubation token, and then additionally helping as you incubate, is a little all in, but I will say, I really do like the art of this card. I know that's not a good reason, but I really do think it's very strong, and if you see this as, just a decent artifact generator, I don't think it's too bad. Something that we're going to get back to with additions a little later is we want to be able to recast our Phyrexians over and over again. And if you think of Norn's Inquisitor as, 2 mana, you get a 2/2 incubate, but then Brimaz also sees you casting this creature and creates another 2/2 incubate egg, and then you can spend mana further to crack those eggs. I think it gets a lot better, because 2 mana to sacrifice this creature, bring in, and basically have double Brimaz triggers is a pretty good deal. Going a bit further, we've got, definitely some more kind of traditional Kindred cards. I think these are fine. I'm not too impressed with Bloodline Pretender. I think that, it's cute that it functions as a Phyrexian and is an artifact creature, so it does trigger Brimaz on the way in, even though they're not a Phyrexian until they're on the battlefield. Actually, that's not true. They're always a Phyrexian. Regardless, still cute. Once again, this +1/+1 counter thing is just okay. Remember that the incubation tokens do not enter the battlefield as Phyrexians. They come in as artifacts, and then they don't enter the battlefield. They just transform. So this creature will generally stay a 2/2 unless you're casting Phyrexians, and then you just have kind of a very slow growing creature, which isn't too impressive. Going a bit further, we've got some very strong ones at higher mana, but Graveshifter is definitely one of those cards that I think is also just a little too cute. I like the mentality of rebuying our creatures, and I'm going to offer something a little better. But at this point, just because they're a Phyrexian that brings back a Phyrexian, I don't think is enough. 4 mana competes with our commander. Our commander is clearly much better than this card, and generally you just do not want to be casting a 2/2, if you can, for 4 mana, if you can help it. Whether or not this creates a 4 mana incubate, I still don't think it's particularly good, so I think this is an easy cut. Now this is going to be a hard one, but I do think the Obliterator and the Vindicator aren't very ideal. They're really, really hard to cast in a deck that runs 23 basics. That means way more than half of your lands, I can't do the math of the percentage, cannot be used to cast one of these two at any given time. So the reasonableness of casting these cards is pretty bad. That being said, they're really fun creatures and they're really powerful, and perhaps if you have more of a ramp strategy, or if you're using more mana fixing, it might be more accessible. But even then, it might be a situation where Phyrexian Obliterator doesn't get cast till turn 6 or 7, and then that's not really a good deal. This is a very expensive wall. Your opponents will just attack you. This is Mages of the Moat, right? They'll just attack with flying or unblockable, or just have enough tokens they don't particularly care. Whereas the Phyrexian Vindicator at least can reflect that damage to remove creatures, but even then, I'm not too impressed by it. In a more dedicated, stuffy doll kind of build, I think it's better, but in the current build, I think it's kind of hard to cast and going to be clunky most of the time. Still, very cool cards, and I'd like to play them otherwise. Notably, you're playing one Defiler and not the other. I don't see a reason why not to play both, because if you like one, obviously Defiler of Fate is much better than the other one, but I mean, you're in Phyrexian, you like those vibes, I do too. I would probably play both. Gulping Scrap Trap. I had a commenter recently tell me to be a lot kinder to this card. I'm not gonna do that. Gulping Scrap Trap is a terrible card. I'm so sorry. Please do not play this card. It is too much mana, and without meaningful flicker or reanimation, it's not good, and even if you did, it's 5 mana. If this was like a 2 mana 0/1 or a 1/1 with the same ability, I might change my mind, but at the current setup, oh, yeah, no, please no. Looking further, the rest of our creatures are rather good. Looking at a lot of our other casts and spells, I'm generally impressed. I will say Yawgmoth's Vile Offering, though on theme, is a lot of mana and not always ideal, so I think it's an easy cut. Mortify feels like it should be Stroke of Midnight, but otherwise a decent card. Looking at artifacts, we've got a few equipment that I don't particularly like. Prosthetic Injector is just okay, doesn't really work because we're not big onto Toxic. Bladed Battle Fan is a cute combat trick, but it's a common for a reason. It's just not very good. The Tablet of Completion also is a lot of work for what's essentially just a mana ramp, a mana rock, that's what it is, my goodness. Tablet of Completion is just a mana rock that eventually can be used to draw a card, where you could just instead run Mind Stone, which you already do, which is much better. Looking at the final stuff, Grafted Exoskeleton feels just kind of cute. I don't think it's really where you want to be. It's a tremendous amount of mana to equip and creates a liability in your deck. And Norn's Decree, I think, is just fine. It's just fine. This is just going to draw your opponents more cards than it's worth, and without enough infect, you can't preemptively set this up. You're going to have to reactively set this up, which means most of the time it will not be active. This is like a pseudo protection spell that doesn't even protect you, and though it technically incentivizes your opponents to attack each other, it might just set up things where your opponents are just going to attack each other with 1/1s when you're in the lead, and therefore they're going to get advantage out of Norn's Decree more than you will. So I don't particularly like it. Cigar to Summon is really, really cool here. I think it's probably, with Elsh Norn, one of the best cards in the deck, and I really like what you've done here. All right, so let's look at some additions, and let's see what I'm going to try to do with these Incubate counters. Before that, we're in black. We should be playing Dark Ritual. With Dark Ritual, you can, cheat out your commander turn 2. You've got a bunch of 3 mana black cards. Dark Ritual is a fantastic card, and if you can get away playing it, I often say you should. You can even just use it to power out a mana rock early, and that's often something that I think is strong enough. So, big fan. Something else, I'm realizing the order I put these cards is all over the place, so you'll have to excuse me. Retribution of the Ancients is a really powerful card to take advantage of how Incubate works. Granted, it can only remove +1/+1 counters from creatures, which isn't as good, but it basically translates this into 3 mana if you don't have a creature, an Incubate token active, and so 2 to flip it, 1 black, sacrifice oh my goodness, 3 mana, 2 to flip the Incubate token, and then 1 black to remove all the counters and kill a creature. And that's like the worst payoff for you, because if you already have an Incubate token or another creature with a +1/+1 counter, this card is just 1 black mana to destroy something, and if that Phyrexian incubated creature is way bigger than the creature you want to kill, you get to keep it, and for more black mana, kill more creatures. This is one of those cards that I think are very, very much so forgotten for its power level, and on turns where you just have an extra bunch of black mana, you can just kill a bunch of creatures. And there is an element to this deck that you get to hold up mana, either to flip incubation tokens or for other abilities, and we'll get to that to the end, but you're basically going to be rewarded for playing smart, and I really like that. Looking at some Phyrexians, the first one I want to talk about is one of 2 from MH3. Metastatic Evangel is going into my Vishgraz deck and should definitely be here. This is just such a powerful card. It basically makes it that every time a creature enters the battlefield on your side, as long as it's not a token, you will proliferate, and that by itself is just really, really good. If you can put a counter or a +1/+1 counter on this creature, then you have a very quick growing creature, especially with some of the creatures that you have that enable this kind of strategy. Notably, I would say, oops, that one's mine. Where are you? Our 4 mana Filigree Vector, a card I'm always raving about. With this card in mind, together is incredibly powerful. You will be growing your team, your entire board, very, very quickly, and that's going to make into very lethal attacks very fast. On the other side, another Phyrexian we just got is the Etched Slith. Etched Slith, which is Sliths used to be creatures on Mirrodin, so it makes sense that they've been Phyrexianized, that when they hit, they get a +1/+1 counter. Now, this is definitely a power crept version, and there's also a white version, but I believe it's not a Phyrexian. That are much better than the originals. This one has Menace, which is great, and also when it deals damage to a player, it grows, but also it removes a counter from something. And I think this is a lot stronger than it looks. There's just going to be a lot of opportunities to use this to slightly reduce the power of your opponent's creatures, to deal with sagas. Generally, you don't want to use this on sagas. You can use this on your own sagas, but like other things that count counters, this will make a big difference. Technically, you can't remove your own poison counters, but you can remove energy or poison counters off of your opponents if you wish. I think notably you can remove experience counters with this card, which I think is really, really powerful against the right deck. This is definitely kind of a sleeper hit, and I think it will be very strong. And maybe this should also go in Vishgraz. I'll have to think about that. Now, we're making artifacts. We want something to do with these artifacts. Marin Apprentice is kind of the card that combines these two strategies, because Marin Apprentice works really well with the Proliferate. Generally use this to give her the +1/+1 counter rather than make the 1/1. Even though I understand making the 1/1 is an additional trigger, when you play Proliferate, you want that first counter to be on her, make her 2/3, then she's easily a 3/4, 4/5, etc., etc. But she also will benefit off of your artifacts dying. And let's look into what ways we have to use. Oh, not yet. Once again, the order's a little messed. So we'll look into artifacts in a second. Something about this deck that I was talking about this, I want to be able to reanimate Phyrexians over and over again, and I want to put them into hand, not onto the battlefield, because with that, I can then get another trigger off of Brimaz. Phyrexian Reclamation is both a very strong card by itself, but it's also in flavor and really good for the strategy here. So this is an easy inclusion. All right, now let's talk about sacrificing artifacts. Anihilating Glare is a card that I'm generally very impressed with. I find that just as a common from new Phyrexia, Phyrexia All Will Be One, we've kind of forgotten its power, but its ability to just use any of your extra artifacts or flipped incubation tokens to fuel it as a 1-mana removal spell, very, very good. There's going to be a lot of times where mana efficiency is key, and cashing in those quote-unquote mana rocks, the incubation rocks, will be very, very useful in reducing mana. Think about it like this. When you sacrifice a incubation egg to Annihilating Glare, it is akin to you had a mana rock that taps for 4 mana once, right? Maybe that's like giving it too much credit, but I think that's a good example of how powerful the incubation rocks can be, especially when you're not really going out of your way to create them. They're just attached to your commander. Looking at a few more repeatable or otherwise reusable ways to sacrifice them, Ashot Flesh Mechanist really catches my eye as a card I've always really, really liked. Now, the thing is, Ashot definitely has some problems to her. You have to sacrifice creatures, and if you do, you get Power Stones. Now, here's the idea. If you have Ashot and you have a clean attack, you basically pay 2 mana on an incubation token, and then you make a tapped Power Stone token. Power Stone tokens can only be used for artifact spell. The only spells they can cast, sorry, this is very specific, can't be used to cast a non-artifact spell. So it can't cast everything, but it can be used to activate certain activated abilities that you do have a few of. But if you math it out, that an incubation token plus 2 mana, it's like casting a mana rock, it kind of adds up about the same. I don't know how I feel about this. The more I think about it, the more suspect it is. But I love Ashot. She's one of my commanders, so I thought I'd throw her a bone here. Even though I'm even just gonna delete this from the list because I don't think she's good enough. But Keskin, on the other hand, I think is a very, very good controlled sacrifice outlet for this deck. Not all, obviously being a Phyrexian is very, very good, but this ability is a lot stronger than it looks. I used to really doubt it because it felt like sacrificing 3 artifacts and or creatures was a lot, but when the things you're sacrificing are coming off of your commander for basically free or ETB off of other creatures, you have it's a lot easier to take advantage of this. And it is draw 2 out of the top 3, which is pretty powerful. So with that in mind, Keskin, I think, really does belong here. A nice and easy 3-mana creature. Another very good 3-mana. I think I said I wasn't going to add too many 3-mana cards, but they're just so strong in these colors. Braid's Arisen Nightmare is definitely an incredibly powerful use of all of these incubation tokens. Think about casting that 2-mana creature that immediately makes an incubation token, and then on the next turn playing Braids and sacrificing that token. I don't really expect your opponents to be sacrificing their mana rocks, which means this can draw you up to 3 cards that first turn, and then from that point on, it's very easy to continue generating like more artifacts or more creatures to sacrifice. And as mentioned before, or maybe I didn't mention enough, these sacrifice abilities work really well with Brimaz as they sacrifice a Phyrexian during that turn, which allows you to proliferate the rest of your things. Notably, Keskin also can work on other people's turns, which is very powerful to get another Brimaz trigger, whereas Braids is static on your end step. Braids is a phenomenal creature, and I have a very hard time not recommending her in these kind of decks, especially as I recommended earlier, Dark Ritual. If you haven't seen the game, I've used it before. You play a swamp, you use Dark Ritual, you play Braids, and then you sacrifice that swamp, hopefully drawing more lands in the process. A fantastic creature, and I think she belongs very much so in your deck. Speaking of card draw, Rowan's Grim Search is another card I like to suggest in black decks that use tokens. Once again, a very, very powerful use of these incubation tokens you're basically getting for free, letting you look up to basically the top 6 cards of your deck, putting the rest in your graveyard, which is generally very, very good. And at instant speed, once again, this is something to do with our mana that we keep up, we keep floating around by the end of our last opponent's end step. Either we're transforming incubations or we're casting draw spells or activated abilities. Very, very strong. Likewise, Greed, for the exact same reasons, is a very good mana sink in a deck like this, and I just felt like you could use a little more card draw, and Rowan's Grim Search and Greed feel like where I want you to be. And those are my additions for the deck. Generally, I just don't want you to give up on Incubate quite yet. I want you to try it a little longer, and should that time come that you're just ready to completely get rid of it, I think, as I said before, I'll link this Vishgraz Deck. And as I said before, I'll link this Vishgraz Deck. If you're feeling like you're absolutely done with Incubate, this would be the direction I would go in a +1/+1 counter Phyrexian shell. I will note there's very few Phyrexians in this deck. Bloated Contaminator and where are we? There's the Rat. Acre Rats and Defiler, Vigor, and Contaminated Grafter are the only real Phyrexians in the deck outside of Vishgraz. So there is something to say that it is not what I would traditionally consider a Phyrexian Kindred deck, but if you're looking for those kind of mechanics and that kind of flavor, Vishgraz is definitely an incredibly powerful commander that you will be very, very impressed with. I hope this video was helpful for you. I'm really excited to see what happens. Hopefully you'll comment or send a message sometime soon to let me know how it goes. And yeah, thank you so much for sending the deck. Thank you for supporting the channel. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.